Picture three men. They are beyond sight or healthy diet. Isolated by a virus, they decide to turn to old TV for solace. Will they find comfort? Or will they find the Twilight Zone? All right, guys, welcome to the last Twilight Zone Zone. This is your host, Nick, and today we're talking about our final two episodes. To Serve Man, the classic with, we'll get into it. Another one that was ripped off by The Simpsons. And finally, The Dummy, which is another one that there is a similar episode called Caesar and Me. I wasn't crazy. Anyway, so we'll start off with To Serve Man. Gentlemen, what'd you think?
Disarmament as a prelude to domestication. In this case, literally.
You're not wrong. This is one I remember from like this old sci-fi anthology that I read when I was a kid. It was word for word this episode, so it's surprising that I had that connection before I saw this. Plus, I mean, Jaws from James Bond is in this too, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, he lived forever, apparently. He was like in his early 20s during this, of course, and then he ends up being in Happy Gilmore in the early 90s. So, that's quite a long career he had as being just a kind of huge, tall dude. Playing...
Oh, man.
I'm going to get this wrong. The Kanamits?
Yeah, Kanamits.
Yeah.
He was around until 2014 when he passed away, which usually people that tall just have a bunch of health problems. So, well done, Mr.
Totally.
Keel.
I mean, then everyone else here, we have some character actors, but like, of course, again, he steals the show as the alien who comes to Earth and speaks psychically, which just means he holds his mouth open and there's ADR. Right? It's very, very specific. There's also Lloyd Buckner, who, again, one of these guys who's in every show that you've heard of from the 60s. And he played Professor Delacroix in Satan's School for Girls. So there you go. And I don't know what you'd call her. Like, she's not like a secretary. She's like an assistant or something like that. But she's a translator in the American government. Susan Cummings plays like his colleague, Patty, who helps to translate what becomes the MacGuffin of this episode, kind of. But I guess also, as the beginning here, we are introduced to what? Like, you have Michael Chambers, our main character, locked in a little prison chamber, and a voice offers him a meal, which he says no to. He lights up a cigarette, right?
So much smoking.
Oh, dude.
Well, in this case, it's an appetite suppressant, so it's thematically relevant.
That's right. And we kind of cut to significantly earlier, months earlier, when the Kanamits, a race of like giant aliens, have landed. And like, I'm going to get this wrong. Like, do we get the UN first, or do we get the opening narration first?
Now, there's two opening narrations. The first is by Professor Chambers when he's locked up in that cell, talking about how the aliens first came to Earth and like how they were essentially gods delivering redemption. And then we get Mr. Serling's narration after that.
Yeah, and to be clear here, this one is unusual in how much narration there is. It's shorthand because they're trying to get away with technique to ignore the fact that months are supposed to be happening, which is not generally how Twilight Zones happen. Most Twilight Zone episodes happen like within the course of an afternoon, pretty much universally. So this one is kind of helped along by some substantial narration by Lloyd Bachner, Dr. Chambers or Professor Chambers or whatever they end up calling him.
The narration from Professor Chambers at the beginning was word for word from...
I mean, it would make sense. There's nothing wrong. I clicked on the guy's named Damon Knight is the writer of the original short story. And, he has dozens of other credits. All of this seems kind of like pulpy stuff, right? He also wrote The Country of Kind and Be My Guest. One ended up adapted for a movie, apparently, and voted one of the most important sci-fi fictions of the time. And Be My Guest ended up as weird. Anyway, just another famous short story.
Be My Guest. I feel a song coming on.
Are you going to sing it?
Make
Be my
sure
guest. Be my guest. I'm going to eat you wearing a vest. Oh, spoilers.
I don't think we need to worry about spoilers. Hey, Nick, I just realized you haven't done Mr. Serling's narration yet.
Yeah, let's do it. Respectfully submitted for your perusal. A Kanamits, height little over 9 feet, weight in the neighborhood of 350 pounds. Origin unknown. Motives, therein hangs the tale. For in just a moment, we're going to ask you to shake hands figuratively with the Christopher Columbus from another galaxy and another time. This is the Twilight Zone. Yeah.
Which in retrospect was kind of the spoiler right there. Christopher Columbus from another time.
That's right. And, taking people away and promising them everything and no one comes back. Yeah, it's good. That's what you call classic writing. But yeah, so we can get through this. Like, we start out with the UN trying to decide what to do. The Secretary General announces that there's aliens coming and that they're going to address everyone via telepathy.
Well, what happens is after Professor Chambers explains why he's on the ship, they flash back to, what was it, a UN meeting where Richard Keel in giant forehead makeup shows up and explains why his species is now on Earth.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, what he's promising them is everything, right? Like, we can cure diseases, we can introduce new technologies to double your food supply, get rid of energy shortages. Like, they develop defensive systems that block external weapons. So, like, the military essentially goes defunct immediately. It's quite, Santa Claus. They keep saying Santa Claus over and over again.
Yeah. That was one of the lines of dialogue. It was the age of Santa Claus.
That's right.
Now, one thing that's different in the episode from the short story is I obviously don't have that book anymore, but I remember the aliens being described as like short little dwarfs with boar heads. So it's like they looked like wild boars that were walking upright.
Well, and I mean, I guess the idea is that you want to make them distinct, and I will give it to this one. The design on the aliens is pretty great.
It was a little too reminiscent of This Island Earth for me. Do you remember that one, Nick?
I do not.
It's the movie they riffed on the MST3K movie.
Oh, sure. Correction, I do remember that one. Hey, Matt, why don't you give us a plot synopsis?
Okay, so we start out with our hero in some kind of locked room, smoking, a lot, and he's refusing to eat food they're giving him. And we have a narration indicating some bad stuff is going on. Flashback to the arrival of a bunch of aliens, well, although we only meet one, and they claim to have come to uplift humanity and improve us by giving us all this technology, like stuff to make fertilizers to make famine obsolete, allegedly impenetrable shields so every country can protect themselves, so armies are demobilized. And then they start running a transit service where people can come visit their happy planet. But at the UN, one of them has left a book behind. And while all this is happening, some military types are translating the cookbook, translating the book. The title is To Serve Man, but what exactly do they mean?
That's right. And the assumption at first is that to serve man is a positive thing, because pretty much everything they have been describing, so to speak, is serving us in some way, providing us with defense mechanisms, being very positive about the, we can improve your agriculture, we can improve this and that and the other thing. It all turns out to be you kind of got there.
One of the funniest moments in this episode is that they give the aliens a lie detector test, right? So, in order to determine whether or not they actually mean to help humanity. And it's funny how much the aliens don't take it seriously at first, or are demonstrating that they can pass a lie detector test. So, like, the psychologist asks them, how did you get to our planet? And the alien just goes, oh, we walked.
That's right. And like Matt alluded to, this is, we mentioned before, Richard Kiel, the guy who played Jaws, which is, he's distinct. He's a very tall dude. He ended up being over 7'5" or something like that. Standard bad knees situation.
Unless you were Shooter McGavin, in which case you were fucked.
That's right. And like you said, we don't know if they all just look the same or if we only see Richard Kiel over and over again.
Nominally, we see more of them because there's scenes where the aliens are next to each other. I mean, they're all Richard Kiel, but I think the implication is their entire species is on the planet.
Yeah. And at a certain point, the military guy who's kind of bummed that there's no need for a military anymore has this line like, there are thousands of them here. We don't know exactly how many, but for every one of them, there seems to be another 100 Americans who are willing to leave Earth to go to this planet.
Now, that's one thing I didn't get. Like Matt said, they offer a ferry service to their home planet, but if Earth is a paradise, why would anyone go?
It sounded like they were just wanting to check it out and visit like tourists.
Yeah, I get the feeling they didn't exactly know anything. I mean, I guess it's stupid people. I assume it's a metaphor for something.
Well, they weigh everybody before they get on the UFO, which hints at what the ending is, but I don't know. They never explained what's on the home planet that would make anybody even take a vacation there, considering the Earth's been healed.
Well, it sounds like they're giving out free stuff.
Oh, well, that'll do it.
Never underestimate what people will do for free stuff. For a t-shirt, for a, whatever.
Now, and this is going to be a real geeky poll, so Nick, you can slap me later. Did you ever read Kingdom Come?
The Superman comic?
Yeah.
Or Justice League comic? I have, actually.
This reminded me a lot of that, especially in the first act when Superman goes to the UN and says, oh, we're going to fix everything that's wrong. And the UN, the heads of the UN are all like, we don't want you to. what's going to happen to the commanders at the Pentagon or the commanders all over the world if there's no war.
And then the Flash starts eating people.
I don't think that happened in Kingdom Come. I think that's one of those joke-em-ups you keep advertising, Nick.
Yeah. You handled it with aplomb. But yeah, so in terms of, this, I guess, they fix the world's problems. They get rid of the military by, making it obsolete. And they kind of sort of save the day as far as famine goes, and create limitless electricity. And, like you alluded to, people start lining up because if they can give us all this stuff, this great stuff, why wouldn't we want to go to see them?
Well, they also introduce a force field that countries can put around their borders, so there's no possibility of nuclear war. Which, considering the time period, was, I'm sure, very attractive.
Well, yeah, totally. And like the kind of fundamental basis for all of this stuff is the promise of more. Now, the question that is brought up as though it is a plot hole, which is kind of funny. Keel, as the main Kamanit, leaves behind this book, like you alluded to. And this is what our main character and his, main characters, I guess, are working on, trying to translate this thing, trying to figure out what he's doing and whether or not he's being earnest and honest and yada, 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 with what's going on. Now, of course, the whole twist is they get the cover, which is to serve man, but they have problems because not only do they have to translate it, but it's a different alphabet. And so there's this kind of sort of tension going on between it as to what is going to be done. Like, well, what is, what is being said? What is this all about? Et cetera, et cetera. And we don't really know. But turns out, after months of them kind of hanging out, dealing with us as people, et cetera, that the whole thing, like, you have to literally apply to go to their home planet. And people are waiting to do so.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember how it was handled, the original short story, because I know they addressed it. And here it's just sort of, oh, well, that's the next step. People want to go off-world to this alien planet, which is apparently a paradise, but Earth's a paradise now. And it was something like a cultural exchange. Like they were essentially foreign exchange students, if I remember correctly.
As a comment, there are only about 2,000 Kaminids on Earth. So it could be like a series of embassies, and the embassies are all like processing visitors.
Yeah, that's what they say. They say that there's like an embassy in every town now, and what the Kaminids have done is improve the world, and so now people want to see their, like, the homeworld of their glorious benefactors, I guess, etc.
Which, now, we've already said what the ending is. They've translated the title of that book that the aliens leave at the UN, and the professor's assistant runs up saying, "It's a cookbook," right as he's boarding, and that's why he's in that cell, because he's essentially cattle.
Yeah, the Kaminid, when he hears this, he starts trying to run off the ramp, and the Kaminid does some straight up pro wrestling stuff, hustles up the ramp, pulls up the ramp behind him, and he gone.
Yeah, I mean, and we should say that the special effects here are very basic. The ship looks very much like the Day the Earth Stood Still's kind of ship. It's fine, but like then we cut to the fact that these people are essentially being breeded like, or taken to the slaughterhouse. They're being eaten. And they do a good job of kind of showing that. They, you know, we don't want you guys. I think the line is even, we don't want you to lose any weight.
Yeah, and he says it in such a obnoxious way, like, eat up. We wouldn't want you to lose weight.
Well, plus Richard Keel comes into the room and he's like smiling as he telepathically says that. So, of course, Nick, as far as I know, the real twist is there's space dust on the book, and it's about how to cook for humans.
The Simpsons version of this is really, 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 really bad.
You're not wrong.
Well, I mean, and it's just it's it's the Family Guy joke. It's a rare miss. It's a rare miss for the Simpsons.
Well,
but this one in particular, the joke just goes on too long. And
that was a fairly early Treehouse of Horror, if I remember correctly. So
second or third season.
Yeah, they didn't know what they were doing at that point.
No, and it shows. Like, the dramatic ending of this is her yelling, it's a cookbook. To serve man is a cookbook, which doesn't mean anything. I mean, like, I guess next she goes to the press and tells people not to get on the Kaminid ship, but it's too late for her friend.
Yeah, the way he's running off makes it seem like the scam is up.
Now,
we've all been there, I guess, trying to scam people. Turns out, something.
Well, Nick, I mean, we should go ahead and say I've been trying to figure out how to cook Matt for a couple of years now.
That's right.
Since you guys did the Patreon episode on Austin Powers, the Matt is right. I have been plotting to cook him, but so far unsuccessfully.
If you play that episode backwards, it's about how to put Matt into a lentil soup.
There you
Simpsons joke.
That's another
lentils. Tisk tisk. I'd rather be in a curry.
There you go.
Now, I prefer how the short story ends, which is basically the narrator goes back. The character's a little different, but it ends with this character who's not slept for 2 weeks, essentially, just pulling their hair out, and they're like, what's going on? And the reveal is, do you want to know why I haven't slept in 2 weeks? I translated the first paragraph of that book. It's a cookbook, and that's where it ends. There's no wraparound. There's no bookend where he's on the ship and they're saying, eat up. We wouldn't want you to lose weight. I think that's a lot more effective, just cutting it off there, because then your imagination goes wild and it's a lot more horrifying.
I don't know. I kind of like this. I think it works well.
I hate to challenge you, but what about that ending works well for you?
Well, because then there's actual fear. Like, it affects the planet. Like, we instead have a man who now knows he's going to his fate. And so we have to establish, why does he decide to eat his meal at the end? Is it to preserve his strength?
He doesn't try to run out the door when the door is open and the Kaminid is distracted, so maybe he's too sleep deprived and tired to even bother.
Well, the last shot is literally him chowing down.
Well, the thing that gets me, he breaks the fourth wall, which the Twilight Zone, besides Rod Serling, never really did, if I recall correctly.
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I mean, we get a little bit from, what is that guy? Harold Bemis in There Was Time Now. I mean, like, I don't know who else he's talking to.
I thought he was talking to himself as his mind goes.
Fair, but he's looking at the camera.
Even Harold Bemis, he was talking to himself. You got the sense that he was addressing the audience, but it was also made sense in the context of the narrative that he was breaking down. In this case, no, it's a direct fourth wall break.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. You're not wrong. It is an episode. I don't know. It is a Rod episode, so I feel like it's very intentional. But it is an unusual turn. I don't know. I thought it was fine. I had nothing wrong with this episode. Nothing but good things to say.
I mean, it's a great episode. It's really effective, and this is what the Twilight Zone is supposed to be. These little sci-fi parables.
Mm-hmm. And I think in that regard, it does a good job holding up. It's, I mean, I don't know. I guess we should go to the next one. I'll give the closing narration then, because it's not that this one is bad. I maybe it's just that we know this one too well, which has been the problem with a couple of these, where it just feels like I know where this is going from the beginning. The recollection of one Michael Chambers with appropriate flashbacks and soliloquy, or simply stated, the evolution of man, the cycle of going from dust to dessert, the metamorphosis from being the ruler of a planet to an ingredient in someone else's soup. It's tonight's bill of fare from the Twilight Zone. I think he had fun writing that one.
I think you're right.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's completely nonsense. Obviously, like the idea that you could translate a text like this is completely insane anyway, right? It's a perfect kind of MacGuffin. Again, like it's hard for me to put my mind in someone who had no idea what this was going to be. So I kind of give it to them. Let's cut over to the next one.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
All right, guys, we're back. The last one we are going to do for this show is The Dummy. The Dummy, which is again, one you probably heard of before, starring Cliff Robertson, who was a famous ventriloquist, and also played JFK in the JFK PT Boat 109 movie, and won an Academy Award for Best Actor in 1968.
Are we going to overlook Cliff Robertson's greatest achievement, which was Uncle Ben in the Spider-Man trilogy?
The man who died 30 times.
He was also the Pat Buchanan as president in Escape from L.A., which we did on the main feed.
He did 1,000,000 years ago. And he plays he played Buzz Aldrin in the autobiographic version of his story, Return to Earth. Plays the head of the CIA in Washington behind closed doors. Like, he's a good actor, and he's very good in this.
I didn't even realize it was him at first.
Well, I'm like you alluded to. I was introduced to him in 2002 as Uncle Ben. Like, the man must have been in almost 80 years old by the time that came out. So, with this, when he was in his, 40s, or maybe
he was 88 when he died, so you're probably right.
Yeah, there you go. We got a square-jawed guy who is a ventriloquist doing a very cheesy, classic ventriloquism act. Although, I guess, a step up from Jeff Dunham, it's not kind of racist.
I kill you. Silence.
There's also Senor Jalapeno on a stick, which is great.
Boy.
Yeah. And there's that other guy. There's another one who looks exactly like him, who has a trumpet dummy that he does on Fox News, and God help us.
Isn't Jeff Dunham literally performing in Branson these days?
Yeah. No, I think he has like a permanent stage show set up. He's one of those guys who just kind of established himself. God knows. I mean, Branson's the weird choice, actually, I'd say. I always think of it like, the quote The Simpsons, Flanders' version of Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Where's Branson?
But anyway, this is what.
Where's Branson?
It's in Missouri.
But again, just think of it as like the country boy version of Vegas. Like, it's filled with casinos. People in residence are like, old country singers who perform all the time. Yakov Smirnoff used to have a show there.
So did Ray J. Johnson.
Ray J. Johnson's, exactly. It's like everyone's favorite second tier characters. But yeah, so that's kind of it. I mean, this is one with the dummy talks. I don't know what to tell you.
Or maybe he's going insane. We don't know.
I will say that's what makes this a decent episode. The fact that he has this asshole of an agent played by Frank Sutton, who, God, for your parents, if your parents are there. I mean, he died relatively young. He died when he was 49 or maybe just 50. But he's the guy who is Sergeant Carter on Gomer Pyle USMC, the one that the senior commander that always is like infinitely frustrated by Pyle. And other than that, he was on everything in the 1960s and then died of cigarettes. So
everybody dies of cigarettes.
No, I mean, it's no joke. Like, he was several pack a day smoker, died of a heart attack, same as Rod Sterling.
And you can literally see Rod holding a cigarette in this episode.
Oh yeah, dude. They couldn't take it out. Like, if it took more than one take, he had a cigarette in his hand. Anyway, so let me just give you the line. You're watching a ventriloquist named Jerry Etherson, a voice thrower par excellence. His alter ego sitting atop his lap is a brash stick of kindling with the sombric Willie.
Sobriquet?
Maybe. I need to
find
those
words I've read but never heard anyone actually use.
Well, I guess you didn't watch this episode then, huh? Did you?
But I did.
Sobriquet.
Hey, I was right the first time.
Beware the eyebrows.
Sobriquet.
There we go. The sobriquet, Willie. In a moment, Mr. Etherson and his naughty pine partner will be booked in a one out-of-the-way bistros, that small, dark, intimate place known as the Twilight Zone.
Now, that last sentence especially makes me think of somebody's like, oh, hey, you want the best show in town? There's a small, dark, intimate place, and the girls are all going to get naked for you. You got to go to the Twilight Zone.
By the by, this is written by Rod. There is another one called Caesar and Me, which also has a dummy, which is not written by Rod.
Oh, Jackie Cooper, right? The original Uncle Fester. Wasn't that one?
That's the one. That's the one. And that one has it has almost the exact same introduction.
This is also clearly the episode or the thing that the Batman creators ripped off to create Arnold Wesker and Scarface.
Right. Sure. And I mean, it's a fine premise. But, this one, Daniel, why don't you give us the plot, actually?
Okay, sure. So, like Rod says, we're introduced to a performing act in a nightclub where Jerry, the ventriloquist, is performing with Willie, the dummy. And at the end of the act, Jerry goes back into his dressing room and starts drinking and rambles about how he thinks his dummy is alive. And his agent thinks, okay, you've been diagnosed as a schizophrenic. Pull it together. Come on. Otherwise, I'm not your agent anymore. So he tries to switch up the act with a different dummy who's essentially this dummy that's got really thick glasses, and that's the joke. But he's still haunted by images of Willie moving around the dressing room and like winking when nobody's holding him. So he's still trying to hold on to sanity while apparently sanity doesn't want to hold on to him.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we're not really sure what's going on here, and that's why I think this one works. Like, I've seen the other one, Caesar and Me one, where like literally it's less about is he crazy or not. That's the one. Caesar and Me in particular is the one that seems more like the ventriloquist of Batman, because like there's like robbery that takes place. The performer is terrible and he's perpetually broke, so he keeps having to like sell stuff like his grandfather's watch, and then the watch is robbed and ends up back in his pocket. And he doesn't do it, of course. It's the dummy, and it's that kind of thing.
Well, the dummy bites him,
right? In this one he does. Caesar Me in this one. But the question, of course, is he could make the dummy bite him too, right?
Hey, you're onto something there.
There you go. Other than Cliff Roberts, there's a couple people worth mentioning in this. For example, there's a guy named Ralph Manza, who is the doorman, who's no one, but he's been in 200 things, including he plays Hitler in Blazing Saddles. And he's the fisherman in the scene in Godzilla in 2008.
You know, 1998, that one?
The 1998 one where he's like, where Jean Reno goes, "Hey there, man, what did you see? What did you see out there?" And the guy goes, "Godzilla." That's him.
Oh, also there are chorus girls in this episode, and that's all they're credited as. One of them is Edie Williams.
Edie Williams is the famous one. She ends up being in Playboy, and being like...
Oh, she was in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls.
In the Beverly Hillbillies and in Batman and in Lost in Space, and like she's the one who's an actor, an actress. She always plays like the bombshell, and she does fine in this. But as far as this goes, yeah, I mean it's a pretty straightforward idea. He starts going kind of crazy and bigger and crazy and bigger. He's treating his schizophrenia with alcohol, which is always bad.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, if anyone is listening out there, see an actual psychiatrist. Don't self-medicate.
Well, and B, he has seen psychiatrists. He's just choosing to ignore them, which is bad.
They don't believe him because he's saying, "My dummy's trying to kill me," and they're like, "No, that's not happening." And he's like, "Yes, it is," and he turns out to be right.
He is. I mean, that's the other thing that's weird about all of this, of course, that we have this character that is his manager, and the manager, look, by defending you or whatever, I am essentially throwing myself away, blah, 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 blah. I've tried to get you every gig in town, and this is the best we can get you. You're not worth it. Like, it's really rough. And no one seems to really care.
Well, it was interesting having the showgirls in the episode. It reminded me a lot of All That Jazz, if you've ever seen that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're like a dream reflection of what Jerry, not Jeremy, he's not here tonight, what Jerry wishes the reception of his act would be, that he'd just have beautiful women throwing themselves at him. And he gets that for like the briefest second, and then they're all looking at each other like, what's with this lunatic?
And I mean, like, as they kind of make reference to, his act is not really even anything worth watching. It's like the most kind of cliche nonsense, little puns. It's fine, you know. It's mainly though because it's delivered by a decent actor than it is actually anything. But you know, that's kind of the game in town, and he's right. It's not good. And the manager's like, look, he's not bringing him in, and this is a small place in Kansas City, I think. So the whole idea that you can't even fill this crowd in this middle of nowhere place, we need to get rid of you. Meanwhile, his alternate act with whatever it is, something Willie. No, what's the backup dummy's name? About Goofy Goggles, right? is just so silly nonsense, right? It's all about how he's blind and yada yada yada, and he literally we see him come up with the act, which is about 10 minutes long. He figures it out on the fly. There's clearly no thought put into it. It's the guy would lose his job.
Appropriate for what a nightclub ventriloquist act would be back in the day.
Yeah, possible. I just it
served us a good contract from his act with Willie.
Fair. I will say as well. After this though, it gets crazy. Like, he's hanging out with the showgirls a little bit. It's a little bit goofy. It's a little bit ribald, and he then he takes Goofy Goggles with him, and then goes to and throws Willie in this trunk, locks the trunk, and he essentially goes out back. And when he goes out back, he starts hearing, hey, knothead, why'd you throw me in this trunk? And again, this is now schizophrenia. This is total schizophrenia.
Yeah, he tries to ask out one of the showgirls. He has such a total psychotic break. She runs away from him screaming.
Oh my god, that was such a terrible scene. Not like terrible as in badly made, but just so uncomfortable.
Yeah, life lesson. If you're having a psychotic break, don't ask anyone out on a date. It's not going to go well.
You're going to be introduced to Maze very quickly.
Well, and that's kind of what they say, right? Like, on top of the whole, what's it? He's like, look, why don't we go get a drink? Why don't we get 3 drinks? I was like, look, whatever, just don't let me be alone with my thoughts. And you're like, oh, he's crazy.
Well, well, Nick, that's what I'm saying whenever I ask if you want to meet for lunch. Nick, don't let me be alone with my thoughts.
That's funny. And then the next day, or not even, later that night, he goes back to the green room. And like, at this point, his psychosis is so bad. Like, the manager's like, look, just go out with the crowds, make a few jokes. They'll buy you drinks. You like drinking, don't you, drunkie? Just go schmooze. He goes, look, I can't leave my room. And he looks over his shoulder because he's watching. So he decides once and for all he's going to destroy the dummy. And he accidentally destroys Goofy Goggles instead.
Poor Goofy Goggles. He was an innocent victim in all of this.
That's right.
Gone too soon.
Gone too soon.
The Josh Gad of ventriloquist dummies.
Yeah. Anyway, so he steps down when the lights come back on after crushing this thing. Like, he must have given it some good old, like, Robert De Niro kicks to the head. He goes, oh no, it's the wrong dummy. Then who's here? And there we see Willie sitting on the couch, and he goes, like, in a stare down. Then the end of it is pure insanity.
Oh yeah, I hated the ending to this because it was too obvious.
You thought this was obvious?
The tail end, yeah, especially after the conversation we're about to talk about.
Okay, so what's the conversation then, Daniel? Let's do that.
Okay, so Willie's talking to Jerry about... I can't say Jerry these days without going, oh, Jerry! Anyway.
There you go.
Anyway, about, well, how can you be real? You're wood. And it's like, well, Jerry, you made me real. And then they're talking about a new deal. Well, Willie is talking about a deal he wants to make with Jerry. And that's what leads up to the ending, which is, I personally wasn't a fan.
Yeah, so
I didn't quite get it. So they have like they switched identities or something, or is he hallucinating or what?
No, the former.
The former. The dummy has become real now, and the former ventriloquist has been turned into a dummy.
And it's such bad makeup, too, on the ventriloquist. If I saw that guy performing on stage, I'd be like, the fuck happened to you?
See, I thought it was going to be a much simpler ending, wherein the next morning, maybe it's the call girl, or not the call girl, showgirl, or maybe it's his manager comes into the green room.
Early 60s, there was no difference between the two.
Well, I mean, I guess you voted for Kennedy or you didn't. He comes in, his manager or the showgirl come in. The ventriloquist is dead on the floor, and the dummy makes a joke. That's how I was sure it was going to end. How I was positive it was going to end. But alas, I guess I was wrong.
See, I would have liked if it was an ending where newbie ventriloquist was like at a junk shop somewhere trying to find a dummy and found a dummy that looked like Jerry there. And then the cycle would continue.
And it smiles.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. But instead we get this weird cut. And by the way, they knew this looked bad because they cut to it for half a second. And the guy who's playing Willie as a big dude looks so little like him. We barely focus on him for a second. You can kind of make a mannequin look like a person, but the casting on the other side was pretty crap. That's kind of the end of the episode. Anyway, so I'll read the final thing, and then we'll kind of wrap this whole little sideshow up. What's known in the parlance of the time as the old switcheroo. From boss to blockhead in a few uneasy lessons. And if you're given to nightclubbing on occasion, check this act. It's called Willie and Jerry. And they're generally booked into some of the clubs along the Gray Night Way, known as the Twilight Zone. So, there you go. Funny enough, the same puppet that is Willie here is in the other one, Caesar and Me, from the 5th season, that we're just not going to get to. So, we've concluded this series. Daniel, what did you want to do?
Well, since it's the last episode of the spin-off, I'd love if each of us could briefly talk about episodes that we didn't get to, but are still worthwhile for new fans of the Twilight Zone.
Well, I would say it's kind of sort of, to me, I mean, this is a weird show because it's essentially Rod Serling's baby, and you could tell when he's at his height of his powers, it's at its best. 90% of the episodes we did were in the first season, I think. And then there's a few more later on, some fun ones at the end. But, like, you could almost start at the beginning, watch the first season, and be fine. With that in mind, I would throw out Where Is Everyone, which is literally the pilot. And it's everything that the Twilight Zone is. A man wakes up in a town. He doesn't recognize the town. He doesn't recommend who he is. And the town is abandoned. Like, that's the Twilight Zone, baby. And then I guess I'll do 2 more. There's one called, also in the first season, called And When the Sky Was Opened, which is fantastic. 3 pilots crash land in the desert on an experimental aircraft, which was supposed to be like a spacecraft, but it disappears from radar and crashes into the desert. And it's these 3 guys, but when one of them comes up for breakfast the next day to check on his colleagues to see what's going on, there's only one other, and no one remembers the third ever even being there. And like, even describing it, it feels, of course, Twilight Zone-y, but the whole question of sanity, the question of science that we maybe should never have reached, the fact that sometimes people remember him, other people don't. Very Twilight Zone-y. And I guess the third one, just for goofs, is one of my favorites, like comedy ones, I guess, is The Mighty Casey, where a baseball manager takes his, played by Jack Warden of all people, who again is like old Batman show. He won an Emmy. I don't know if he won whatever. He's in Shampoo and in Brian's Song. Wins the championship when he's given this pitcher who can't pitch when it's raining. Turns out it's because he's a robot. It's silly. It's fun. Um, yeah, but yeah, those are the three I'd throw at you.
Cool. Also, just so we don't break format, which of the two did you think was better for this week?
I like To Serve Man. I know it's cliche and I know the story and everyone knows the story, so it's not like it's a surprise. But I do think it's a very crisp episode. I think it's good, and I think Richard Kiel does a good job effectively having to be a scarecrow. Like he's an automaton who doesn't ever have real words come out of his mouth. And I think he does a good job with it.
Cool. I mean, I don't disagree. Matt, what about you? Which of the two was your favorite? And are there any other Twilight Zone episodes you recommend that we haven't covered?
Okay, well, of the two today, I like the dummy better just because I think the acting is better, especially when our friend the ventriloquist totally loses it during his botched wooing. I may not be the best judge because I knew about To Serve Man for years thanks to The Simpsons. So it would have probably been more of a surprise if you weren't as familiar with all the rip-offs and gossip about it. As far as episodes I would recommend, I have not really seen very many episodes of Twilight Zone other than the ones we've done for the Twilight Zone Zone. So I can't really comment intelligently.
Well, I think there's a couple others you should check out, Matt, and I've got 4 that I'd recommend that we haven't covered. First and foremost, To Serve Man would be my pick this week. I didn't hate the dummy. I thought the acting was good. I didn't like the ending. I thought the twist was kind of dopey. It could have been a lot better, but seeing early Cliff Robertson was great. And with great ventriloquism comes great responsibilities. So well done, sir. But at the end of the day, no, To Serve Man's the real classic of the two because, once again, I mean, it's such an archetype. It's impossible not to examine if you're talking about the Twilight Zone. But anyway, for the other ones, I've got 4. The first is Mr. Dingle the Strong. Nick, have you heard of that?
Help me out, because it sounds familiar.
It's got Burgess Meredith in it, and these Martian scientists find a random geeky earthling and give him super strength. So for a couple of hours, he can just do anything he wants. Like, he'll go up into the beams that are holding the roof up of the bar he's in and split them. Sure. And he'll like punch boulders in half and stuff like that. And for a while, everyone is like amazed he can do this. And then randomly, because he can't see the aliens, they take his strength away and he loses his fame immediately. But then after that happens, Martians gave him super strength. Venetians gave him super intelligence at the end, so he knows everything. So it's kind of like, what was that episode in the diner with the Martians and the Venusians?
Will the real Martian please stand up, I think.
Right. I guess it's a spinoff of that because apparently the Martians and the Venusians hate each other. That was a great one. Burgess Meredith is great in it. After that...
wait, I think I remember this. Isn't Don Rickles also in it?
Yes, he is.
I do know that one. That is a good one.
After that, to me, is great one is Once Upon a Time, which is... It's an episode with Buster Keaton in it. It opens up with him in 1890, and it's a tribute to all the silent films he used to make. And the director was Norman Z. McLeod, who directed the early Marx Brothers movies. Anyway, it starts out as a silent film, and Buster Keaton just hates being a guy in 1890. He thinks it sucks, it's terrible. But he works as a janitor in a lab, and his employer has invented a time helmet that can transport whoever wears it to another decade for a very limited amount of time. And so he's like, oh, this kook. And he puts the helmet on and it works. And he ends up in the 1960s and he's trying to get back to the 1890s because he's just so overwhelmed by cars, by seeing steak going for $2 a pound, stuff like that. Plus, it's Buster Keaton, I mean, towards the end of his career. And he was a legend. It was great seeing him. Two more. Real brief. The Twilight Zone, I think, is the only TV show to ever win an Oscar. And it's for an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, based on the short story. It was directed by a French filmmaker, but it was screened on the Twilight Zone to a U.S. audience. And it's the Ambrose Bierce short story about a guy who gets hung, but the news breaks. He tries to run back into town, but the twist is that's all hallucination and he's dying, and he actually dies at the end because his execution was successful. Sure. Real great. The short story was great, but this adaptation was real good. It's not a traditional Twilight Zone episode, but it's real worthwhile just to see how TV used to, well, when we were kids, TV was considered the gutter, and that's changed, but back in the 60s, it was just amazing seeing a foreign short film on American network television. So, final one is The Masks, because it's a smoking episode. Yeah, I just went there. It's about this dying man who makes the family members in his will wear these bizarre, grotesque Mardi Gras masks and like accuses them all of just being terrible people, and things get weird from there.
Well, don't things always get weird from there?
But it's specifically, if I recall, supposed to be portrayals of like the darknesses of their souls, kind of, sort of.
Yes.
Yeah. It's the one that I thought it was when I saw the pig masks from that other episode we did, Eye of the Beholder, because I believe there's a woman who wears a pig mask in it.
It's very similar. Very similar makeup.
But yeah, but in the meantime, that's it. This little side project is done. So now we, of course, will swear off ever doing side projects again. Of course, that means we'll come back to one before long. Depending on when this comes out, if it comes out on time. This is the start of our 7th season, and we'll be coming out opposite 2009's Star Trek, where we will be returning to a weekly schedule. And on top of returning to a weekly schedule, we will also, and this is weird to say, of course, be still doing our bonus episodes, at least until we drop dead from exhaustion. We'll be attempting to kind of set up this new season. So anyway, thanks, guys. And, well, how do I end these? I don't even know.
Well, thank you all for joining us in the Twilight Zone.
Thanks, guys. The Twilight Zone Zone is a production of Do Letter, Podcasting, and Myopia Defend Your Childhood. It is hosted by Nick Hoffman, paneled by Daniel S. and Matt Quinn. It is edited by Nick and Daniel. The theme song is 6 Impromptus, Opus 5, Impromptu 5 by Jean Sibelius. The list is from Vanity Fair, the 26 episodes we talk about when we talk about The Twilight Zone by Donald Liebenson. The Twilight Zone is created, hosted, and mostly written by Rod Sterling. The Twilight Zone and all clips are owned by CBS Television and Cayuga Productions.